You know, when I was involved in politics and ministry in South Carolina, I recognized that that was a state that depended on free trade. They needed trade. They needed trade for their textiles. They needed trade, automobile companies coming in. They were open for business from everybody. So Donald Trump has come in with a message of protectionism and bash the Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. And for some reason, the people of South Carolina don't seem to care. Trump is leading in the polls 2-1 over Cruz, but Cruz is building an army of evangelical pastors that may surprise everybody. But in the process, the battle for that nomination in South Carolina has turned vicious. The candidates are brutally fighting for votes, and one of the key voting blocs, of course, are evangelical Christians.
That's right. CBN's David Brody talked to two of the leading Republicans, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, about their campaigns and their views on some of the most important issues to Christians.
In one of the most surprising presidential races in ages, billionaire Donald Trump and Tea Party maverick Ted Cruz have emerged as the Republican dynamic duo. They split the first two states, leaving a crucial rubber match in South Carolina. Cruz tells CBN News the math is simple.
I think this is more and more becoming a two-person race. It's between me and Donald Trump. What Iowa and New Hampshire have demonstrated is the only candidate who can beat Donald Trump is me.
South Carolina is a virtual treasure trove of evangelical voters. Conservative Christians make up more than half of the GOP primary electorate. And that's good news for Ted Cruz because he needed those evangelicals to win in Iowa. And now the question in South Carolina is, can he pull off the repeat? He's hoping to pull it off again by encouraging South Carolina pastors to engage the flock. Our CBN cameras were there for this private get-together.
Without exaggeration, I believe the men and women in this room, in the circle of influence you have, and the people that listen and trust your judgment, your wisdom, your guidance, your counsel, the men and women in this room have the ability to change the outcome of the South Carolina primary, and in doing that, to change the outcome of the presidential election, and in doing that, to change the outcome, the direction of this country.
But Cruz's push to mobilize Christians is under scrutiny. First, Ben Carson complained that the Cruz campaign used questionable tactics to discourage his Iowa supporters from voting for him. Now, Marco Rubio and Donald Trump are not happy with how Cruz is framing their views on the Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage.
Several Republican candidates, including my two leading competitors in this state, said publicly that decision was settled. It was the law of the land. We must surrender, accept it, and move on. Now, those are word for word Barack Obama's talking points.
At the time, Trump and Rubio did call the decision the law of the land, but disagreed with the ruling, so they don't appreciate the Obama comparison. Trump took to Facebook saying, quote, "How can Ted Cruz be an evangelical Christian when he lies so much and is so dishonest?" Aboard his campaign bus, Rubio had a few choice words, too.
Ted Cruz is on the stump talking about you and President Obama have the same talking points on marriage.
Yeah, it's very disappointing that Ted says these things. I mean, it's just not true. I really think it's become really disturbing that Ted is willing to make things up out of cold cloth just to win an election.
What do you want to say to some folks that are starting to question, in essence, your character, your Christian character?
If others want to impugn my character, they can do that. I will sing their praises. But I do think people are seeing the way we're running our campaign, with integrity, with character, focusing on issues, focusing on substance, not going into the gutter. If I were to stray, the first person who would hold me accountable is my dad.
As that battle plays out, Jeb Bush is going after South Carolina Christians with tough talk about being a president ready to battle over nominating conservative Supreme Court justices.
The left's going to go after whoever we appoint, and we better be ready. And this will be war.
Bush hopes to claim the establishment lane, but he's going to need to fight off John Kasich, who did well in New Hampshire. And there's also Rubio trying to put that poor debate performance in his rearview mirror.
Adversity is relative. You know, yes, it's not. We didn't do as well in New Hampshire as we wanted to. But real adversity, for some people around the world, are things much deeper and more and worse than that. So, God is going to provide. He'll either provide a way around it or he'll provide a way through it.
It's a good thing God has it under control, because this race has been out of control from the beginning. David Brody, CBN News, in Greenville, South Carolina.
Well, Mark, South Carolina will be the bellwether. Some years ago, there was a candidate for governor in South Carolina. He was a Democrat, and I think he turned Republican. And he'd been, I think, Speaker of the House. So he begins to run, and he and I were friends. And so the next thing you know, his enemies started putting ads on. This man is supported by Pat Robertson.
Oh, my.
And they thought that they would kill him. And what happened? He went from 11% in the polls to 22%.
You doubled it. You doubled it. Good job.
And then they said, and it just was without question that we've showed you that Pat Robertson and that right-wing evangelicals are supporting this man. And he went up to about 40% in the polls. And they kept hammering away, talking about me and him. And he won overwhelming. The election became governor of the state.
Amazing.
But it's amazing because there's so many evangelicals in South Carolina, and they don't take it lightly that their champions get trashed. And I think Cruz is making a determined play for the evangelicals. He himself is a strong evangelical, and he's building up pastors, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pastors to help. So there could be a surprise coming out of South Carolina. If it is, I mean, it will shock everybody because it'll go against the major poll numbers that are coming out now. We've only got a few more days to go. The thing's on Saturday, but it is a big, big primary. Well, in other news, it's the latest round in the ongoing fight between personal privacy and national security. John Jessup has that story in our CBN News Bureau in Washington.
Thanks, Pat. A federal judge has ordered Apple to help the FBI in its investigation of the San Bernardino shooters. One of them, Saeed Farouk, had an iPhone, and the federal government wants to access it for information. But Apple says no. The tech giant warns that if the feds could unlock that iPhone, it could unlock any phone, and to see what's on them. Caitlin Burke has a story.
Apple must hack into one of its users' iPhones. Government orders. The FBI believes Saeed Farouk's iPhone has important information about ISIS as well as the San Bernardino attack. But after several failed attempts to guess his password, the feds are locked out.
Continuing to try and guess that passcode isn't an option. After 10 failed attempts, the iPhone is programmed to completely wipe clean and shut down permanently. The FBI needs a way around that.
Apple says the feds are out of luck. CEO Tim Cook rejecting their order to create software that would allow them to access the locked phone. Cook took to the web, writing to Apple users to explain the implications of what the feds are asking. He says, quote, building a version of iOS that bypasses security in this way would undeniably create a backdoor. And while the government may argue that its use would be limited to this case, there's no way to guarantee such control. Cook says that customers expect Apple to protect their personal information, and that Apple is committed to doing just that. In 2014, Apple updated its iPhone operating system to require that the phone be locked by a passcode that only the user knows. Before that, the company could use an extraction tool that would physically plug into the phone and allow it to respond to search warrant requests from the government. FBI Director James Comey told members of Congress last week that encryption is a major problem for law enforcement who, quote, find a device that can't be opened even when a judge says there's probable cause to open it.
Our job is to look at a haystack the size of this country for needles that are increasingly invisible to us because of end-to-end encryption.
Lawmakers and iPhone users are weighing in on this debate over privacy versus national security.
It's been consistent with Apple's policy for quite some time to try to be as unhelpful to law enforcement as possible. They should be on our side in this effort against terrorism.
It's going to give the government the right to go into everybody's phone. Either they're criminals or not, or you're just going on beyond your business. The government is just going to use that against you all the time.
Apple has 5 days to respond to the federal order to hack Farouk's phone. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Thanks, Caitlin. Despite a ceasefire agreement in Syria, it appears nothing has changed on the ground there. In fact, many analysts warn the situation could worsen as Russia stands to gain more power in the Middle East, and while critics blast President Obama for showing weakness in the midst of the conflict. Chris Mitchell brings us that story.
In Munich, the U.S., Russia, and European powers agreed to allow humanitarian relief into Syria and a cessation of hostilities throughout the country. Still, the Russians continue to bomb rebel forces supported by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia.
The Russians will not stop their air raids, and with the ground support of Hezbollah, Iranian, and other Shiite militias worldwide coming from Afghanistan, from Tajikistan, from other places, I think the Russians and the Iranians want to make Assad regime survive, and they will do everything. Now they are on the offense. I think they will not stop at nothing.
Syrian and Iranian forces, backed by Russian airstrikes, are closing in on Aleppo, Syria's largest city. If they take the city, it could change the course of the war and strike a major blow to President Obama's Middle East policy. Located in northwest Syria, Aleppo is one of the rebels' last strongholds. There was a stalemate between the rebels and the Assad regime until Russia came in and tipped the scales.
Some months into the Russian intervention, the sense right now is it really is beginning to take hold and have a very powerful effect on the battlefield, to the detriment of the rebellion and to the advantage of the Assad regime.
While the fate of a faraway Syrian city might seem unimportant to Americans, it represents a major geopolitical shift in the region.
The substantial Russian military buildup in Syria and the Eastern Mediterranean is also shifting the strategic balance in this part of the Mediterranean. So I call on calm, de-escalation, and a political solution to the conflict in Syria.
Yet Middle East expert Jonathan Spire believes Russia wants a battlefield solution.
If they succeed in that, it means that the Syrian map of protagonists, so to speak, will leave only the regime itself with its Russian, Iranian and Iranian backers, the Kurds and Islamic State. It'll be a very major change. That, I think, is what Putin and his allies are going for.
If Putin, Assad and Iran succeed, it means a setback for the U.S. and the West.
If they achieve this goal, would have achieved strategic victory in a vital conflict zone in the Middle East. There's no such thing as a vacuum. This is a zero-sum game. So growing strength for the Russians and the Iranians means growing perceived weakness for the West.
We are now in the midst of historic change in the Middle East, and the United States is not there.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Pat, it's a seeming rebalancing of power right there in the Middle East.
The United States is not there. You heard that. The United States is not there. We have been absent because of Obama, and as a result, we've lost Syria, and ISIS has grown. It didn't have to be that way, but because of a feckless president, this is what you get when you get somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. But what I see, ladies and gentlemen, geopolitically, there is one force that is pro-democracy, pro-U.S., pro-free enterprise, and strong militarily, and that force is made up of the Kurds. Their army is called the Peshmerga, but they have a big presence in Syria, they have a big presence in Iraq, and they have a substantial presence in the south of Turkey. Now, the Turks don't want it. They hate the Kurds. They think the Kurds are just rebels and they're terrorists. They don't want any part of it. And Turks are a key player in NATO. But the truth is, we should not listen to the to the Turks in this particular area. The Kurds need their own country, and that would be a bulwark against this terror. You'd have a friend who shares your values sitting in a key strategic part of the world. They would be in the northern part of Syria. They would be in that southern part of, not southern, but the western part of Iraq. And they could make a balancing force that we need, and all we'd have to do is reinforce them militarily with the appropriate modern weapons, and they could do the rest. It would be a win-win situation. And I know the Turks wouldn't like it, but that's just tough luck. They got nowhere to go.